Okay, good morning. This is Dr. Rutledge. This is the last video I think we'll do this morning. We've got 4 going this morning. We're going to talk about smelly gas. And we've got a lot to talk about. Most of it's simple and straightforward. There's one particularly dangerous part that you should know about. That's called the blind loop syndrome. And you can Google that. We'll go into detail about how to treat it, how to prevent it, things like that. But let's just talk about gas in general. In general, your body doesn't create and put a lot of gas into the bowel itself. So all the gas that you have that comes out your bottom is because somehow you put something into the top of the gut that developed that gas. So one good example is if you drink a lot of carbonated liquid, soda pop, Perrier water, things like that. The carbon dioxide sometimes is not completely absorbed, and so you'll have gas, bloating, and that carbon dioxide will come out in the form of gas out your bottom. Okay, that's pretty clear. But the other mechanism, probably the largest mechanism that results in gas in our MGB patients, is if you eat food prior to having an MGB, your body, the body of somebody who's overweight, has a really good digestive system. So you can put chicken and pizza and ice cream and potatoes and all kinds of starches and everything in there, and routinely the gut miraculously converts all that stuff into small molecules that can be absorbed, and then you can create tissue. You can create brain and eyes and skin and muscle and all this from chicken and onions and potatoes. It's a miracle. In patients who are heavy, that miracle is working too well. That miracle is working too well. Now, if you have a band or a sleeve or a Roux-en-Y, then the eating of that food is interfered with. The eating of food is interfered with, and we call that restriction. In fact, it's restriction caused by a partial blockage. A partial blockage of the band, a partial blockage of the narrow sleeve with the outlet blocked by the pylorus, or a partial blockage in the Roux-en-Y by a tiny little gastric pouch and narrow connection to the Roux-en-Y limb. And then the roux itself has anti-peristaltic waves, so the normal mechanism of peristalsis that squeezes food out of the gut down towards the bottom works in reverse oftentimes. And so in each of those 3 operations, there is restriction by an obstruction. And again, if you think of a local highway, we can decrease the flow of traffic, decrease the number of cars going through an area by putting up a roadblock, and that would be an obstruction. And the band and the sleeve and the Roux-en-Y, in my opinion, work by causing an obstruction. And that restricts the amount of calories you can eat. Okay, that's good. Now, MGB is quite different. MGB is quite different. MGB is really different. And not everybody understands this. So, for example, when I first started doing the MGB, all kinds of critics said, no, it cannot work. It cannot work. First of all, this gastric pouch is too big. I must have heard this 1,000 times. It cannot work, it cannot work, it will not work. Patients won't lose any weight. So, in a nice way, that critics were wrong about that. I'm wrong about things. People who criticize me are wrong about things. It's not a blemish on their record. I'm not perfect, they're not perfect. But it was said, it's worth you understanding, that people said when I did the MGB, oh, they will not lose any weight. Because your gastric pouch is too big, because there's a lot of good, honorable Roux-en-Y doctors who say that you need to make, quote, a micro pouch. And if you watch videos and listen to scientific talks by Roux-en-Y doctors, they're all wound up about making a tiny little gastric pouch. And again, if you go back to our roadblock analogy, they're trying to make a high-grade roadblock. And they think, and they argue, that the mechanism to get good results in Roux-en-Y is a high-grade roadblock, a tiny little pouch. And as I say, many times people said, oh, Dr. Rutledge, you're going to have terrible outcomes. Nobody will lose any weight. That's way too big a gastric pouch. And I'm happy to say they were wrong. They were wrong about something else too. They said, how are you doing that connection? The connection between the stomach and the intestine is called the anastomosis. That connection, again, many good Roux-en-Y surgeons are wound up tight about making a narrow connection between the little tiny gastric pouch and the bowel. And again, if you watch this, oftentimes they will make it so tiny it looks like even the tip of your baby finger won't fit through there. And then when they see Roux-en-Y patients come back, a lot of good Roux-en-Y experts will say, oh, I know the reason that this failed. My obstruction, my roadblock failed because the gastric pouch is too big and the anastomosis, the connection is too big, and so they'll actually go back and operate. And they'll trim the gastric pouch to make it smaller and narrow the anastomosis to make it smaller. And they say this really works. And that hypothesis may work for Roux-en-Y. MGB is exactly opposite. We make a big connection, wide open connection, and again, I would say thousands of doctors have watched me operate and said, you'll have no weight loss. They were wrong. So how do we explain this? Again, let's think of a roadblock. Roadblock decreases the ability to eat because you run into the roadblock. Now, the MGB does not have a roadblock, yet the amount people eat decreases on average by about 75%. So when we survey my 6,000 patients, recently we got data back from 3,000 people who completed the survey, and we asked them to think about how much they ate on their dinner plate before surgery. And they estimated, if you call that 100%, we ask them how much they eat now. On average, it's about a quarter. So they decrease the intake, that the intake of calories is restricted after MGB by about 75%. So this is good. But there's no obstruction. And so the band, the sleeve, and the Roux-en-Y are restriction with obstruction, and the MGB restricts food intake without obstruction. And the reason is that the small bowel is relatively insensitive to lots of sugar in a short time, to lots of fat in a short time, or to lots of any kind of anything in a short time. So that the restriction comes not from a roadblock, but because when you dump it into the small bowel, that food causes the small bowel to be upset with a kind of dumping syndrome. So that the patient has upset stomach and they say, I don't want any more, not because of obstruction, but because it just doesn't feel well. So they stop. They eat about a quarter of what they used to eat. They're usually very happy. We've surveyed sleeve patients and MGB patients. Sleeve patients unhappy, MGB patients happy. MGB patients can eat broccoli and sandwiches and all kinds of things like that very easily, but only in moderate amounts, so exactly what we want. So now that we described that part of the operation, we can say that all four of these operations have a restrictive component. In 3, it's obstructive, and 1, it's restrictive without obstruction. Now we're going to talk about something else. We're going to talk about malabsorption, because that's our ticket to get in explaining gas. So the lap band has no malabsorption. The sleeve, I think, should have no malabsorption. You could argue about rapid gastric emptying, but for the purposes of this discussion and the studies that I've done and seen, there's no malabsorption for the sleeve. And for the Roux-en-Y, there is some malabsorption, but the studies show that if you give someone a measured meal of fat, the malabsorption is quite small. There's some, definitely some. For example, if you measure a normal person, in one study, they had about 5 grams per day of fat appear in their bowel movements when they finished. So they had normal gut, and they lost a little bit of fat. If you looked at them after their Roux-en-Y, it was up to 6 or 7 grams. So it caused a little bit of fat malabsorption, but not much. It causes some fat malabsorption, but not a lot. Most of the effectiveness of the band, the sleeve, and the Roux-en-Y is obstruction. Okay. Not true for the MGB. Not true for the MGB. The MGB causes a profound malabsorption, and so a bunch of things happen. If you put food into that gut, you put the food in, it looks around and says, okay, it's miracle time. Okay, I'm putting in chicken, broccoli. I want you to make it into amino acids and sugars, and then digestible fats with detergent, and I want you to absorb it into your bloodstream, into the liver. Miracle time, okay? When you bypass the first part of the bowel, the duodenum, the gallbladder, the pancreas, and the first part of the gut called the jejunum, big things happen. Okay? So, you may have heard of something called lactose intolerance, right? You know, people have lactose intolerance. And let me explain that that's malabsorption because of poor digestion of the sugar lactose that's in milk. So that enzyme is usually in the upper part of the gut, and for a lot of people, but not everyone, you eat something that has dairy in it. When you eat that dairy product, you have enzymes which break up that lactose sugar. The enzymes are called lactase, and that sugar is broken up and absorbed. And the two sugar, lactose, again, as lactose is made up of two sugars, is it maltose and glucose? Better check that. Then those can be absorbed, but the lactose cannot be absorbed. So in an MGB or in somebody who has lactose intolerance or lactase insufficiency, when the lactose goes in the gut, it's not digested. And that means the sugar is free in the gut. And who lives in the gut? Bacteria. So if you don't eat it, the bacteria look at each other and say, hey, she doesn't want it, we'll take it. So far so good, because that sugar could have gone and on your hips, created fat under your chin or on your tummy. So the fact that the bacteria eat it, so far we don't care. Fine, go ahead. In fact, if we could hire bacteria to eat all of our food, we'd be better off. Except for one problem. The bacteria that live inside your gut know that routinely there's no oxygen in there. In other words, there's no lungs putting oxygen in your gut, so the gut bacteria are anaerobic. No oxygen. And what that means is when they finish eating the lactose, they release all kinds of oddball smelly gases, not carbon dioxide, which is odorless. And so these smelly gases can start to cause gas in the abdomen, and they can cause the odor too. So if you have an MGB, are you allowed to have lactose? Depends on the bypass length, it depends on your gut. But oftentimes, if you have gas, the first thing you want to do is say, am I eating lactose or other things which might have trouble being digested? Okay? And we can talk about yogurt because yogurt's no problem, and I have another couple of videos on that, but I'll just skip over that for now. What's another foodstuff that's wonderful but is very difficult to digest and particularly results in gas and problems if you eat it after MGB? Fat. So we love the taste of fat in food. We know that when companies make artificial foods, that if they make them without fat, they taste like cardboard. So there's something called mouthfeel. We love the kind of juicy taste of things. And in addition to sugar and salt, we got to have fat. Fat, though, is not us. You and I are water, and we know that oil and water, or fat and water, don't mix. So as a way to think about this, remember the Dawn dishwashing liquid commercials? You may remember that somebody puts an oily spaghetti plate into the sink, and bubbles of grease come up onto the water, and those are grease, fat, that cannot mix with the water. Now, on the TV commercial, from the upper right-hand corner of the screen, in comes an aqua blue bottle of Dawn dishwashing liquid detergent. And what happens to those little bubbles of grease? That's right, they dissolve. And so you and I are fitted by God with a little container of detergent so we can do the same to help digest the fat. Our detergent, though, is bile. Our detergent is bile. And it's green. But if we disorder that upper gut by bypassing it, the normal process of digesting fat is interfered with. And if you interfere with it, the fat, again, doesn't get digested as well. You're welcome. In other words, that was what the contract was for, right? If I eat some fat, don't hurt me. Don't put it on my hips. So if you eat some of the fat, now a portion of it will be maldigested. It will be indigestible. And again, the bacteria are going, hey, look, fat. And they will eat that, and again, often create different gases like hydrogen sulfide and methane and things like that. So, what this means is that depending on your diet after MGB, you can have gas and sometimes smelly gas, and it depends on what you eat. And usually if you modify your diet, you can take care of that. And I've got other videos on this. I'm going to ask that you take some time to watch them. Go to YouTube, type in the search box, mini-gastric bypass and Rutledge. There are thousands of videos there. You can type in yogurt and what to eat, gas, things like that. But now let's go on to something else. And again, I've only touched on some of these topics. There's a lot more to go into. But let's talk about blind loop syndrome. We talked about how these good old bacteria are sitting around. They eat the food that you don't eat or don't want to eat. But in some cases, the normal bacteria is replaced by bad bacteria, evil bacteria, that instead of acting kind of friendly at eating the lactose and things like that, they grow and all kinds of things happen in your gut. You start to have really bad breath. I mean, just breath where it smells like something is rotting and dying. You have terrible, terrible gas out your bottom that's just unbelievable. And that is called afferent limb syndrome, afferent loop syndrome, or blind loop syndrome. And again, because of the video time this morning, I don't have enough time to go into the whole thing, but I'll try and do some more on it. But there's lots on the internet. Look up afferent limb syndrome, afferent loop syndrome, blind loop syndrome. All of these will help you understand what to do. And basically, it's begin with say we don't ever want to get in that situation by letting these bad bacteria kind of overgrow. So it comes back to what you have heard me say 100 times, maybe 1,000 times if you've been in my clinics. Eat yogurt. Yogurt has good bacteria. So put good bacteria in every day, and remember it should be plain yogurt, not non-fat yogurt, not flavored yogurt, plain yogurt. Put that healthy bacteria back in the gut 2 or 3 times a day. You don't have to eat a whole cup of it, but even a spoonful will help reseed the good bacteria in your gut, and we have found that helps protect you from this terrible complication of blind loop syndrome. If you get into blind loop syndrome, my opinion is you need to see a gastroenterologist. Don't hesitate to call or contact or email me. I can work with him. And usually we'll treat antibiotics to try and kill off some of the bad bacteria until you can get some good bacteria in there. And the general antibiotic, although there's others now, is Flagyl or metronidazole. So it's been a long video. I want to talk to you more about blind loop syndrome. There's some more videos. There's lots of internet information. Bottom line is, if you have any troubles about this at all, please contact me. I hope you're doing great. I hope you've enjoyed the videos from today. And I can tell you, although it's unusual, I'm talked out. Thanks. See you soon.